poussais, je t'aime. Tu m'avais manqué, poussais, je t'aime, poussais, je t'aime. Tu m'as préféré, poussais, je t'aime, poussais, je t'aime.
Hello there and welcome to Brussels, My Love, our weekly talk show that zooms in on the highs and lows of EU politics. I'm Maeve McMahon. Thanks for tuning in. Coming up this week, 36,000, the number of free train passes that will be up for grabs for 18-year-olds across Europe, provided by the European Commission. The aim? Offer young people the chance to have a European experience and in doing so curate a European feeling. We take a look at why a real EU identity is still abstract and ask if the focus on competitiveness and defence could snatch the cash left for Erasmus, the creative arts and culture. And fresh data shows that trust in the EU and the euro is at its highest in 17 years, especially among young people. But in last year's European Parliament elections, only 3 in 10 youngsters went to the polls, and many of those who voted opted for fringe parties on the far left or right of the political spectrum. We take a look at why politicians are finding it so hard to connect with the most important future generation. A warm welcome to our guest this weekend, Commissioner Glenn Micallef, the Maltese European Commissioner for Intergenerational Fairness, Youth, Culture and Sport. Welcome.
Thank you.
Samira Raffaella, former Dutch MEP, now a visiting fellow in New York at Cornell University. You're welcome.
Thank you.
And Raresh Voicu, he's the president of the European Youth Forum. That's the organisation representing over 100 youth groups from all across the continent. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Lovely to have you all with us, and we're thrilled to have a commissioner as well here on the set, the first ever commissioner, first of many, we hope. But as usual, before we hear from you, let's just hear if promoting and spending on culture can help bring about a European sentiment and a common public sphere.
It's all in the treaties. The EU is founded on common values. The respect of human rights, dignity, freedom, equality, and the rule of law. But the truth is, Europe is having a midlife crisis. As the previously established world order is deteriorating, notably with aggressive behavior from Russia and the US, the ambition is to become a stronger geopolitical actor. Trade and allies are essential. But what makes Europe unique? Well, the ability to influence the world through culture and values. And that could be the ace up its sleeve. Though to unite, we need a shared European identity to rally around. Begging the question, do we have 1 or 27?
So let's pose that question to the Commissioner here, Commissioner Micallef, who's with us in the studio. Do we have 1 European identity or 27? Feels like 27.
So let me just say, first of all, the European Union is a fantastic reality that millions of Europeans live every day. It is a continent without borders. It is a space where people, goods, services and capital get to move freely. And it is a space where people come together. It's a place where 450 million citizens are living what was once a dream and has become a reality on a daily basis. And they're proud Europeans. We have already many European Union citizens who indeed identify as being European, but I acknowledge we can do more. In my opinion, the answer lies in the words of our motto as a European Union, unity and diversity.
Unity and diversity, but is it fit for purpose, this European Union, for the future generations?
It's a great question. And I think we saw in the latest data in the Flash Eurobarometer survey, so we saw young people across the European Union, more than half of them feel more connected to their local and the regional realities and communities than they do to the European level. So we see only 15% of young people feel that there is this kind of European identity. In terms of whether or not the EU is fit for purpose, I think that really comes down to a question of how much does the European Union listen to the priorities of young people, to the needs of young people, and also, yes, to the pains of young people, coming off of a few years full of crises. I think it's a moment where we need to take stock, also looking at the European Parliament elections results, and to ask ourselves, what is the EU, its politicians, and its member states, what are they actually doing for future generations concretely?
Well, you mentioned that Eurobarometer. We actually have the data there that you can take a look at on your screens, which says 34% feel more attached to their own country and to their national identity, and only 15%, Samira, feel that they can affiliate with Brussels, with the EU flag, with the EU anthem. Is this a problem that this town has in connecting and bridging that gap?
That's absolutely a problem. This is in the essence about the importance of representation and participation in our European democracies or European democracy. And if we speak specifically about the participation of youth, we do see that we lack engagement. And that also has to do with a lack of representation and the lack of diversity in politics itself. I mean, look at the European Parliament. I do think it can become more diverse also in terms of youth representation, because through representation, you get the sense of, I belong here, you recognize yourself. So role models are very important also in the European space and European politics to make sure that we engage people. And we should have more grassroots engagement, because we are here at the European level achieving a lot of good results, and we protect very important values, and we make sure that European citizens are secure and safe. But at some point, we do need to realize and explore how we can make these results more visible, and how European citizens, and especially the youth, realizes how that is like affecting their daily lives positively. And my last point is that 61% of the youth is optimistic about the future of the European Union. So there are a lot of opportunities, I believe, to engage specifically the youth.
And it's interesting, you're in charge of youth and culture. And it's funny because in Europe, I feel like we consume more American culture, pop music, even TV news than European.
In Europe, we are enriched by a diverse cultural heritage, by different traditions, by different languages. And all these are part of our identities. They're part of our European identity. The way I see it, and Samira made an excellent point, our European identity and our national identities, they're two sides of the same coin, because they're underpinned by the same shared values that we have in this European Union. So it's about promoting peace and prosperity. It's about human rights. It's about promoting solidarity and inclusion. And of course, we have to now work harder using all the tools that we have at our disposal and all the instruments across all policy areas to promote this idea of identification with Europe. Because identification is the basis of our European identity.
One suggestion that MEPs often come up with is the idea of putting 9th of May, so Europe Day, as a national holiday.
So I think I graduated school a few years ago, high school and so on. And I think for us, the date of 9th of May carried a lot of festivism around it, but seldom did it actually come with a very consistent message of, okay, what is the European Union concretely? What does it do for you as a new citizen, as a young person, and as a citizen of a country that has joined the EU less than 20 years ago? Within my lifetime, I've seen such a change on my own street, in my hometown, and the reality that I live, and just how good the EU's accession from my own country has been. And I think here it's a moment where the question of what is the EU identity actually comes to a space where you realize the fact that those basic building blocks of the EU, the internal market, the free movement, the fact that you can go to any country in the European Union and not be treated any different because of your nationality, or in theory not be treated different because of your nationality, is what is at the core of this European identity. And the way in which this, one of the ways in which this happens is the Erasmus Plus program. So right now we're in the discussion, of course, where we see young people across the European Union take part in this program, but in the next budget of the programs, if we actually want to strengthen this European identity, this belonging, to take it from 15% of young people that feel like they belong to the EU to
and
more than that.
The risk now, Commissioner Micallef, that the Erasmus programme is up on the chopping board. We saw last fall ministers gathering around saying we need to cut the Erasmus because of the strains of the war in Ukraine.
The intention is to strengthen the Erasmus Plus program, and I want to be quite clear on that. If I can single out 3 examples of actual initiatives that helped strengthen our European identity, Erasmus would be the top one. Through Erasmus, for almost now 40 years, we've seen millions of European youth access different strands of the program, strengthening their European identity, and we continue to develop projects which make a difference. You've mentioned in your introduction Discover EU. It gives the opportunity to thousands of young Europeans to travel around Europe, to connect with their peers, to develop their interpersonal skills, to learn about our European identity, and to learn about different cultures and different traditions. But there are other examples, and I'll mention here the work that we do in the cultural space, which is fundamental to discuss ideas, to debate them, to challenge them, and to also celebrate our past but reimagine our future as well. It's absolutely crucial that we nurture initiatives like the European Capital of Culture, which has become a symbol of our unity in diversity, and it's a symbol of how we can shape a European identity.
And what is a European identity? Do you, for example, do you feel European or do you feel more Dutch?
I absolutely feel European, but also Dutch. I got this question a lot, especially throughout my mandate. And I mean, I always say, of course, I'm Dutch. That's where it all started for me. But absolutely, and I feel like I'm European, and I have the Dutch and the European identity both, because let's not forget that this is what makes the European Union so interesting and so beautiful, that we have these 27 European identities and these 27 cultures. So this is the specific culture also that you bring into the public space here, or the political space. And when it comes to engaging youth and people in general, I think it is just really important that we bring solutions for the real life problems that they're dealing with. For example, in the case of youth, I know that the cost of living and the housing crisis and peace and security, like these are all kinds of topics that the youth is worrying about. So if we bring the solutions to them, if we show how Europe and the European Union is actually effectively working on these problems, then I truly believe we can close that gap.
Of course, their views need to be seen as part of the solution. The views of young people contribute to taking this project from strength to strength. I agree completely. We need to continue to enhance the level of participation of youth across all our policy making.
And what are you doing to assure that?
We have multiple initiatives, starting with the youth policy dialogues that we've just now had the first cycle of in the first 100 days. We can elaborate on that, but there are other examples, the Youth Check, for example, the Presidential Youth Advisory Board, the EU Youth Stakeholder Forum, which all are tools that are intended to give youth a voice on issues that matter to them.
And is this reaching out, in your opinion, to youth beyond the privileged youth who have had opportunities like you?
So I think this it's a great question of how these mechanisms are actually implemented. For us, for example, coming back to the Erasmus Plus program, because every time we mention the European identity, this is one of the programs that really come out as they're laying the ground base for what it means as a young person to be European through exchanges, meeting other cultures, other young people from all across the European Union and beyond. What we need, I think, is to make these programs more accessible, we need a fivefold increase in the budget. So we saw also from the Draghi report, we saw this recommendation, if we want to go beyond the 15% of young people in the European Union that the Erasmus Plus program currently has the potential of reaching.
But are member states on board?
That is actually the great question, because right now we see negotiations at the European level where unfortunately this field of youth mobility, intercultural exchanges, learning mobility, support for youth organizations and NGOs and so on is the first one to be on the chopping block. But we have at the national level young people that are actively asking their governments for these increases by showing the value that these exchanges have in their lives and their communities and at the national level as well. Because as a young person, when you go on exchange and you come back from that exchange, you come back with such an enriched cultural baggage and such an enriched knowledge baggage. In terms of the initiatives of the EU to engage young people, I think we can always do better. I think it's a great start that the current college is doing.
Okay. And on that point, we can always do better. Let's bring in another take on what Brussels could do to bridge that gap between the institutions and citizens. We had a chat with a professor in identity politics from Sciences Po in Paris, Rania Czepansky.
People identify both with the European Union or with Europe and with the nation state. So they actually do both. So actually what people do in the European Union can be incorporated in national identities, and what is actually done on the national level can also be incorporated in the European level. So both does not need to cancel each other out. There are like two mechanisms how the European Union could actually do this. So first of all, The European Union could actually try to give more spaces, especially like to people who are currently a bit underrepresented in the European identity. For example, rural citizens, people without a university degree, or people from a working class. A second mechanism could be also to give more representation also on the elite level to people who come from those backgrounds. So politicians coming from those backgrounds.
So that's Rania Chepansky there with two suggestions. Do you think the institutions, Samir, are doing enough to reach these groups, the more rural groups?
I have seen throughout my mandate 2019-2024 that, for example, the European Commission definitely stepped up its efforts to, for example, engage the youth. But all the institutions, so the European Parliament, including, really need to take the topic of diversity and representation and engagement very seriously. I mean, also in terms of young people or people in general with a migrant background, or exactly people from the rural communities. Like, you see that so many layers of society are underrepresented in our European institutions. And that means something for the quality also of the legislation and the policies that we are making. The Commissioner mentioned, I think, a very good practice, the youth check. So a so-called impact assessment for youth, I would say, to make sure that our policies, but I would also say the European Parliament should do the same for legislation, to assess beforehand what the impact on youth will be, and that is very important. But we also need these underrepresented communities like the youth sitting at the table and being part of decision making.
Well, that's why we have the European Youth Forum as well with us today.
That's true, and the Youth Check actually is a proposal of the European Youth Forum that we made in 2022 during the European Year of Youth, and now we're hoping to see more ambitious action from the Commission also when it comes to implementing it throughout the policy-making process, because at the end of creating a policy on, for example, health or competitiveness, if you pass it through a Youth Check, then you're able to say, so if young people have meaningfully had a say in that process, you will be able to say, yes, we spoke with young people and it is also what young people want. But in order to get to that point where it's meaningful, it has to be engaging young people in youth organizations in and creating that space. And here I would also say that this is really something that we cannot move away from anymore. We know it's not the easiest process to do, taking into account the views of so many different communities and so many different types of young people, because young people are not a homogeneous group. At the same time, we have a seat at the table, slowly and slowly. Yeah, we're getting there. The question is, what do we do with it?
These are all parts of a process which is part of a wider effort to give young people a greater role and greater responsibility in our societies and democracy. We started with the dialogues. In the first 100 days, you had 26 commissioners meeting 400 young people from all walks of life, discussing various topics. So we've discussed sport and culture as a means to promote inclusion. We've discussed security and enlargement. We've discussed competitiveness. All these themes through which we've tried to bridge this and create a space where young people and policymakers can come together and have this exchange which will then translate into real and tangible policy actions. So that's the first step. The second step, as I mentioned, was the creation of a EU youth stakeholder group, bringing together national administrations, bringing together partners like the EYF, youth leaders and other partners to have this discussion continue. The youth check is also part of these tools where we analyze all the policies and major legislative decisions and assess their impact on young people. So this is a wide effort trying to put youth at the heart of policymaking. And I agree, Samira.
But is anyone listening? Because inside that commission, I imagine they're dealing with serious problems in there. You have, of course, security issues, defence, trade war with Trump.
It's not a question about whether we're listening or anyone is listening or not, because this is now systematically being done for all our legislative and major policy initiatives.
In a way, yes.
So this is systematic.
In a way.
It's not there yet. I think it's also important to be just very transparent about the fact that the youth check, if we want it to work, it needs to be included in the better regulation toolkit. So to translate that into English, it needs to be part systematically of every single policy that the Commission is producing, and not just at the discretion of the individual directorates and the individual departments in the Commission. Because I think if we start this process and say the European Union is consulting young people and it ends up being a tokenistic process perhaps, that we really will lose this last bit of trust that young people have in the institutions.
Well, there is at least an upcoming concrete momentum, I would say, with the negotiations on the EU budget. I mean, that is a place where we should definitely mainstream youth and where we can assess also the impact on youth. I mean, the budget is a very powerful parliamentary, but in general, a very powerful tool to make sure that we include programs and policies that actually work for youth. You just mentioned, well, topics like the trade tariff war or peace and security. I mean, all these topics are actually very important for the youth too. And the youth is also telling us that we follow the news on that. It's not that we don't mind these
It all impacts
topics,
them.
but it has to do with the level of engagement.
And of course, we've heard about Competitive Compass, Security Compass. What about the Culture Compass you'll be presenting as well by the end of this year? Funds for our libraries, our museums, our cultural heritage.
This is something which is very close to my heart. I believe, the way I see Europe, we are a global cultural powerhouse. So we have a rich and diverse tapestry of heritage in this union. We have which connects people, connects societies, and connects continents. And of course, this is something we have to capitalize on. It's also an instrument that can help us bring people together. If you look at the Notre Dame a couple of weeks ago, it was the place where world leaders come together, and we're home to the largest number of properties that have been assigned UNESCO World Heritage Site, and culture is an area where we need to continue to focus our priorities. So with this in mind, my idea is to propose a cultural compass, to give direction, to give ambition, and to give coherence to the sector. And I want
music to the ears to all of those who work in the creative industries across Europe. But on that point, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Commissioner, for that. And thank you to all our panellists. Stay with us, though, because after the break, we'll be diving into another topic, and that is the widening gap between politicians and youth. See you soon. Welcome back to Brussels, My Love, our weekly chat show here on Euronews, where we're just taking a look back at the news of the week. And today we're in the company of the European Commissioner in charge of youth, Glenn Micallef, the President of the European Youth Forum, and the former MEP, Samira Faela. And this week, big story, of course, on Euronews was Italy's Prime Minister, Meloni, jetting off to the US to meet Donald Trump. But we want to park that story and zoom in now on how young people are feeling about politicians in this world of uncertainty and permi-crisis. As even though recent data says 7 in 10 youngsters say they benefit from being part of the European Union, only a handful went out to vote last June in the Parliament elections, and many say that their trust in political institutions and politics is low. So let's turn to our representative here from the European Youth Forum and ask why.
Well, the first answer would be to look at the makeup of the parliament. So research shows us that generally when a parliament is made up or lacks representation of a certain group or has very few members of that group, then the members of that specific group are less likely to have trust in that institution. It's research that tells us that. And we see that the European Parliament, for example, on average is has an average age of 6 years above the general public, the average age in the European Union. So of course, in that sense, as a young person, when you don't see yourself represented as an age group, as a social category in of itself, you're much less motivated and inclined to go out and vote. On one hand, on the other hand, it's about the issues that politicians talk about, whether or not they actually speak about the issues that impact you on a daily basis. Young people in the past 5 years, we've been through a pandemic, we've seen global economic crisis, financial instability, housing. If you don't talk about these things, take concrete steps, why would you as a young person?
Are young people just furious with mainstream political groups? Is that something that they've been telling you in the youth dialogue?
Well, in the youth dialogues, we've had various discussions. I agree with Rari that we need to really focus on the issues that matter to young people, on their priorities, but also on their frustrations. I don't like that we dilute this discussion into an exchange on voting exercises, because it's much wider than that. We need to have views of young people on issues from education to quality employment, from climate change to mental health, from security to competitiveness, because they have a lot to contribute in our process and in making sure that whatever we do addresses their concerns.
But it's hard to have that conversation if you're not on the platforms where young people are, like TikTok. There's obviously a ban for commissioners and certain MEPs that you can't be on those platforms?
Oh, yes and no, because it goes beyond also these platforms. Social media is absolutely crucial to engage with the youth. I definitely realized that and experienced that myself as a former MEP. But what we also need is just go to the youth. Like we as politicians need to be proactive. That is the whole reason why I myself back then introduced a school tour, for example. I visited schools and universities. I initiated my own project, Europe to the Streets. Well, the name says it all. Like,
And how were you received?
that was very, very positively received. And until now, I'm actually still engaging with the youth communities on this specific topic. But also, for example, students with a vocational education background, like they are really missing out here. And I purposely went to these school communities and also spoke to these students to explain about the European institutions. But then you also realize that they have so many questions, but also so much knowledge on politics and all kinds of topics and issues.
Even though the school curricular has nothing really on
Even
EU.
though, yes.
Let's bring in some voices from here from Brussels to find out what the young people here think about European politicians and politics. Take a look.
I don't feel too close to European politicians because I don't think there have been many changes at European or even international level in recent years. First of all, I'm very proud to be European, so I'm interested in European politics. Now, I don't know the details. It's something I follow from quite a distance.
Il y en a qui parlent même pas de la situation des étudiants.
Some people don't even talk about the situation of students, which for some is very complicated. Some politicians try to take an interest, but sometimes you get the impression that it's all about trying to get people to vote for them, and not much is changing. I feel impacted, but not close though, because I have the impression that most of the things they want to put in place or that they talk about aren't going to impact me or my day-to-day. I don't feel necessarily taken into account.
So there you go, a lot of young people here in Brussels, which is of course the home of the EU institutions, feeling that they're not being heard there, Commissioner. That's the reality.
The reality is that there are many young people who already feel that this project, most of us indeed do, positively contributes to their daily lives, positively contributes to our societies. We look back at various initiatives that this union has taken to actually make a positive difference. And I can mention, for example, the times when we had, not so long ago, when we had COVID. And this is the union that led to
things have changed since COVID. I remember a few years ago as well, the European Parliament elections, everyone was voting for the Greta wave, the green wave. And now we're seeing more and more young people voting for the far right.
It's true, but I think it's important to also challenge the narrative that we saw after the European Parliament elections, that young people pushed the rise of the far right. It's true, there was an increase in the population of young people that voted for the far right, but on average, young people are still more likely to vote for progressive parties and progressive policies in general. But I do think what the increase that we saw in that age group, in our age group, for the vote of the extremist parties, needs to raise a question as to how well actually the politicians speak to young people when creating their political priorities. Because there comes a moment where, as a young person, you receive a leaflet on the street, or you receive an ad, or anything else that speaks about topics that they're of course important, but to you they don't resonate. And nobody asked you, as a young person from a political party or a politician, okay, what is it that matters to you? What should I take forward? And then actually be accountable to you as a young person after I get elected about what I've done to improve your situation.
But this is where I also say that the progressive politicians really need to reflect on themselves. Because the reason why the youth is actually voting a lot for populist politicians also has to do with the way progressive politicians do politics. It's very elite in many ways. It can be very elite. And the language is difficult, and the topics that we choose. So not putting effort in actually going there, grassroots engagement, and this is what the progressive politicians really need to implement.
That's the key word, isn't it? Grassroots engagement.
Initiatives like you mentioned, Samira, taking Europe to the streets, going local, going regional, and in different parts of our union, explaining how our initiatives that we implement here are making a difference to people.
Even going for a walk.
Yeah.
Take a walk around the city, just chat to people.
Yes.
Like a normal human being.
Exactly. Just act normal.
Yeah.
I had many of these exchanges in different regions, from Naples to Athens to Chemnitz.
Well, you're an exception, not the rule. And on that point, we can bring this conversation to a close. Thank you so much to our panellists for being with us. And thank you for watching. See you soon here on Euronews. Hello there and welcome to Brussels, My Love, our weekly talk show here on Euronews about the good, bad and ugly of EU policies and politics. I'm Maeve McMahon, and this week we're bringing you a special show all about European identity, culture and youth with our special guest, the EU Commissioner in charge of Culture and Youth, Glenn Micallef. We're also joined by the President of the European Youth Forum and a former Dutch MEP, Samira Rafaela. And given our focus on young people this week, we also wanted to focus on their silent crisis, and that is the mental health crisis and cyberbullying that we're seeing increase. To hear how grave the situation really is, we had a chat with Dominique Noton. She runs the Suicide Prevention Centre and a hotline here in Brussels.
Since 2020, there have been around 15% more calls from young people, and even very young people. So in proportion to 2019, we have seen this increase of around 15%. When I say very young people, I sometimes mean children aged 10 or 11 with suicidal thoughts.
And that was Dominique Noton there from the Suicide Prevention Centre here in Brussels, telling us how children as young as 10 are contemplating suicide. This is extremely worrying. Obviously, it's up to member states to address this perhaps, but what are you doing as well as the Commissioner?
First of all, let's start speaking about mental health as a fundamental right. The issue of mental health, the risks and pressures that young people face make them more prevalent to facing this challenges in relation to mental health. The statistics are shocking. So we have in the European Union 50% of our youth who report to have faced mental health challenges, from loneliness to anxiety to stress. The causes are diverse. What I know for sure is that following COVID, we've seen more cases. As a result of job insecurity, as a result of burnout, as a result of school disruptions and the digital environments. So I think what we need to do is work on a lot of awareness, campaigns that encourage people to seek assistance. There's no stigma in seeking advice. Secondly, we have to work with stakeholders, with civil society, with national authorities and with member states to start addressing this issue very concretely.
Rajesh, what is the European Youth Forum doing in this field?
Well, I think we heard from this administrator of a suicide prevention hotline, and I think at that moment it's already a very late point when we talk about intervening to prevent a very acute moment, right, in this mental health journey. The sooner we look towards it and understand what are the struggles that young people are facing, the easier it is to really demystify and decodify what is behind the mental health crisis. And I think I would start in the pandemic. When we have data that shows us that the pandemic has hit young people more than almost any other population because it led to such a strong isolation. School environments were closed. Speaking of children aged 10 to 12, you lose all of your friends and connections overnight. So, of course, it leaves a huge mark. And I would say for young people of maybe more advanced ages, in a way, we see so many struggles with working conditions and actually what the future of work is. So much anxiety around the financial constraints of being in the labor market, of precariousness in the labor market, not knowing. So many young people have 0-hour contracts. Can you imagine that? Not knowing if this week you'll have 1 shift, 2 shifts, 3 shifts, and then knowing that when you go back home, another problem, because housing, rent prices have increased by 24%.
And on housing, 1 in 4 young people are in overcrowded conditions across the EU.
Exactly.
Not in Malta, by the way. They were low on the list there, but in Romania, for example, it's pretty bad. But let's bring in some voices of young people, what it's like to be young in 2025. I had the chance to have a chat with a number of students from the University of Amsterdam this week during their visit to Brussels.
There are a lot of things which are stressing us. I mean, there's geopolitical tensions, there's climate change.
The anxiety comes from 2 directions. First of all, what's happening around the world, but also the anxiety surrounding the idea of success and what we're supposed to do in order to be enough. I think a lot more accent should be placed on people understanding how their minds work and maybe having more news in that direction or more programs.
I think they need to put more actual effort on maintaining our mental health.
I would love for them to have an initiative to bring young people together, just to like find the European spirit again.
They were young students here speaking to me earlier this week in Brussels. Samira, reaction to what you heard there?
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree. And these are also the kind of conversations I had back then as an MEP with the youth. And they were telling us this. What I find very important is that when we speak about the topic of mental health, is that we convey the message that they shouldn't be ashamed of it, because they are very alone in processing these mental issues. So schools, universities, all the places, even the sports clubs, like all the places they go, need to create a safe space for youth to talk about it. We should normalize that conversation. That is very necessary. And my last point on that, I'm very worried about what is happening on social media and the internet, because that absolutely plays a role in the nowadays mental health issues that the youth have.
We have to understand better the relationship between digital environments and the effects that is having, especially social media platforms, on young people. So our work there will focus to start an EU-wide inquiry on the broader effects of social media, which I will complement with an action plan on cyberbullying, which has become a very, very distressing situation for many young people. We have in this union 1 in 6 people young people, children even, contacting our safer internet centers across the EU reporting cyberbullying cases. One part of the solution, in my opinion, continues to be improving our cultural offers, giving young people the space to actually express themselves and invest in something that is positively impacting their quality of life, and sport. Sport can be quite an important remedy there. We have a shocking situation in this continent when it comes to physical activity. We need to promote more physical activity, especially among young people and adolescents.
And physical connection. Even those students, they were like, can the EU bring us together? We want to come together. People are spending so much time online, alone.
That's true, but I think we always, at the Youth Forum, we always take this as a person in context approach. We cannot have a generalized conversation about the mental health of young people ever, because we're facing such different challenges. And I think when it comes to cyberbullying and digital safety online, the fear here is to not have a paternalistic approach. They're there, you young person, you have to protect you against everything that's wrong and bad in this world.
You're against the smartphone ban?
No, I don't think it's being for and against. I think it's about understanding for young people what are the issues that they're facing online, because there might be a point where we become overprotective of young people and children, and actually tone down some of the benefits that the internet brought us, information, access to social networking and so on. We need to be careful about it, but we do it together.
Okay, on that very interesting point, we can bring this conversation to an end. Thank you so much to our panel, Commissioner Glenn Micallef, Samira Rafaela, former Dutch MEP, now visiting fellow at Cornell University, and Rados Vojku, the president of the European Youth Forum. Lovely to have you all with us.
Thank you.
If you'd like to reach out, please drop us an email to brusselsmylove@euronews.com. You can also catch us on various social media. And for all of you celebrating this weekend, happy Easter. See you very soon on Euronews.